Hi class. It's Karina. Hi. I'm gonna be talking to you guys about my final project. I'm from LA and I'm in LA right now. Sorry I couldn't be there. I respect all of your times and I hope I can see some of your projects from you guys personally. I'm sure they're fantastic. I focused on the roundhouse and rape law and kind of a personal reading of the book that I hope is applicable according to Dr. Katanski after she reads my paper. I basically wanted to piece together a couple of questions that I had during the class and kind of face some of my challenges that I had with this book in specific, particularly around the narrator. So my argument is pretty much centered around two-ish type questions. So basically, why is rape law the way that it is in terms of tribal jurisdiction, sovereignty, and how it's enforced. And I also wanted to see how we can see the state of rape law in this country in the roundhouse, even though the roundhouse is supposed to take place in a certain time, in a certain context, and in a certain setting. I was super intrigued by the fact that it was written through Joe's perspective, and I kind of I was very transparent about it in class. I was very much struggling with the fact that it wasn't something that happened to him, and when I mean that, I don't mean that he wasn't impacted by it, but I mean it wasn't something that happened to him. So I thought it was a very interesting choice to write it from the perspective of somebody who did not go through it. After reading a couple of pieces, I've come to understand a little bit more, or at least have a general idea of maybe why this is. So to answer my question, I cast a pretty wide net for resources, and some of the coolest things that I found were Sarah Deer's work. And as a legal scholar, she not only has quite the mastery of law and the way that it interacts with, other contexts that aren't Anglo-American, and she writes very, in a very easy way to read. So it was really dope to work with a lot of her stuff. And specifically, I ended up working with my main piece, I guess, is kind of surrounded around decolonizing rape law, which was in a law review. And it kind of centered on chapters 7 and 9 from the Sarah Deer book, The Beginning and End of Rape, which Dr. Katanski has put, I think, both those chapters on Moodle. So you should check those out whenever you have time. And essentially what she's looking at is, really deconstructing how we look at rape in the context of Native women and how we should be looking at it, at least according to her suggestions. And one of her suggestions, which I think is really interesting, is that justice should look like whatever the woman or the person who was sexually assaulted wants, and that it can be community based and it can be communal, but it does have to center the woman's voice. And while I understand that this book was written, like it says in the afterword, kind of as a response to TLOA, I think that's what it is. I think that this book could be read as almost like a Sarah Deer-esque example of why the current system, both in the federal courts and in the tribal courts, isn't working. And what I mean to say by this is that, for example, in the roundhouse, we have a narrator who is not the person who experienced the sexual assault, and we see that a lot of the actions taken on behalf of this person who experienced this usually are not things that they're consulted on. And so with that, I thought it was really interesting to look at the book as sort of a cautionary tale about the reasons why we cannot perform justice in these specific contexts how it should be, specifically with this argument that because colonialization is still people are still feeling aftershocks of colonization, within these tribal groups, that a lot of how they are thinking about retaliation, vengeance, and justice is still centered around coloniality, so that it fails. I'm making that argument myself. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but I just think that that is a really interesting way to look at the Roundhouse in how it's written, especially considering that we do not get much of Geraldine's voice. And what I mean to say that, but by that is not necessarily that she's not present and that she isn't supported, etc. But what I mean is that we do not get a lot of her dialogue, we don't get a lot of her perspective. And I would like to argue, using Sarah Deer's decolonizing rape law, that it is kind of a message being sent to people about whose voice needs to be centered in moments like these, and what does justice look like, and if justice is something individual or something that can be community based. So yeah, some of the other resources that I got, I have a resource from C-SPAN that kind of puts into words a lot of different videos from debates that have happened on the House floor concerning the VAWA Reauthorization Act of 2013, including this one piece where a man talks about how he doesn't want VAWA to be expanded to include Native women because it is just a way to exert some sort of power and take it back, which to me connects very simply to CRT when we were talking about material determinism and colorblindness, and how a lot of these work in tandem to exclude people from a very essentialist name like the Violence Against Women Act, but how it still leaves certain women out, and it like, you know, doesn't enforce the same things for everybody across the board. And so using that frame and applying that to, you know, Decolonizing Rape Law, Chapter 7 and 9 from Sarah Deer, which are about VAWA and other reformations, using The Unkillable Mother, which is a piece that I found on sovereignty and survivance, specifically for women in Native communities, considering that they are who continue the line of Native people and kind of are the reason why Native people continue to exist, why they're so important and unkillable, even in situations that they have to survive something so grotesque. And then I've also picked a couple articles from Andrea Smith and Reina Ramirez, particularly the Smith article, I think it was Conquest, if not the other one, that was talking about how Native women are viewed as dirty and subhuman, therefore making their rapes okay. And actually the words said were like they don't count, which pretty much sets up a lot of why rape law is the way that it is. So I'm framing essentially, after this long-winded big explanation, I want to frame, and I have framed, rape law through a lens of like colonization, and kind of looking at how the after effects of colonization, including bipartisanship, racism, and prejudice, just kind of how they work in tandem to make it so that justice is kind of unattainable, even through a community organizational structure that wants to help out. So yeah.